Geschichten eines Flugzeugbauers. 2007. Finally flying. I've avoided talking about my private life ever since, and that's how it should stay in the series. But the passion for flying must have come from somewhere, and it can be traced back to my childhood. I already mentioned my longing for the sky in part 0 of this series, in which I showed my first article published in World of One Aero. It has always been there, this longing for the sky. What flying fool doesn't know the dream in which you simply fly through the air without any outside help and can see everything from above? I also had these dreams as a child. They faded as I got older, but the memory of them and the dreamed feeling remained, and so did the longing for the sky. We little humans are denied this if we don't build our own wings. That's what I did. But in the bureaucratic existence of our society and its legal constraints, you need a piece of paper that says you can do it, and you pay for it so that you can do it. In my social position, it was just as impossible for me to get a pilot's license as it was to ever buy my own plane. That changed when I started to build my own airplanes. In the meantime, this led me to the point where I could afford the costs with which I could buy the administrative permission to fly. But I wanted to have my own airplane. Of course, I never approached anything with naivety, so I realized that it would be sensible to slowly approach aviation and the peculiarities of the aircraft of the First World War. And so I thought about getting at least one tailwheel airplane first. I had a Piper Cub or something like that in my mind. From there I wanted to continue in the direction of Stampe or Bücker, etc. But one after the other, in the end everything turned out differently anyway. While looking for a suitable Piper, I stumbled across Giovanni Marchi in Italy, who offered me one. When the money was put aside, I packed my wife and children into my red Passat and drove over the Alps to see him. A nice little trip. Once there, we were inspecting the Piper when suddenly a nice, cute little face peeked out of the back corner of the hangar in my direction. It was the nose of an Aermacchi B308. I had never seen this plane before and asked Giovanni what it was. He showed me the little thing and said he wanted to sell it too. After consulting with my family, the decision was made. It was the one. The little plane was only about half the price of the Piper anyway, so good choice. It was also a historic airplane, built in 1948 and even designed in 1938. And I'm glad it wasn't standing the other way around in the hangar, because it's ugly as hell from the back. Everything was discussed over dinner and sealed with a handshake. We spent the night at Giovanni's place. The next morning we headed back home across the Alps. What a bureaucratic adventure that was turned out to be only later. The next big problem that had to be solved was the parking space. No hangar space I had up to then. There was nothing free anywhere, and so my way led me to Ahlen-Elchingen, EDPA. There was a free hangar space available next to Paul Ehrhart's Clean 526. I didn't know Paul at the time, but when I asked about the possibilities at the tower, it was he who explained everything to me and also said that you could become a member of the Luftsportring Aalen and get your pilot's license there. Well, that was positive. I had an airplane, I had the place for it, I had to get my pilot's license anyway, so I quickly became a member of the club and registered for training. I was already known there, and so I was soon approached by others, and word got around that I was some kind of crazy person who would first buy an ancient airplane and then get his pilot's license. The plane wasn't even there yet, so some people made fun of me. I discussed the possibility of taking the plane over the Alps by air, with the old hands at the airfield, but I was told that the weather and the time of year were not suitable. Shortly afterwards, I decided to rent Hartmut Sammet's long airplane trailer in Heubach to take it with my father on the T3 flatbed across the Alps, dismantle the airplane there, tie it to the trailer, and then transport it back across the Alps. That was also an adventure in itself and full of great memories. It was agreed with Hartmut Sammet that the aircraft then would be overhauled at his premises and registered in Germany under his supervision. A glamour of an administrative nature, I tell you. Hartmut was away for the weekend, so we parked the trailer at the airfield in Allen-Elchingen upon our return, where the plane was then cleaned by hand by the whole family. That was fun also. Of course, I was the #1 topic of conversation at the airfield. Training was running, and my actual idea was to train as a second type on my little Olga. After all, it used to be a training aircraft, but that was quickly scuppered by the authorities, and so I trained on Cessna 152s and 172s. Who the hell is Olga, you ask? Well, Olga was the name of my new little airplane in the family circle. And that's how it came about. At that time, we had a very cute, tame cockatiel called Olga. And when my Yannick saw the MB308 sitting there for the first time on her legs and her big belly, he said with a laugh, "Ha, look, she looks like our Olga." It's been like that ever since. In Allen-Elchingen, the flight instructors were all volunteers, and you sometimes train with this one, sometimes with that one, but I trained with Paul Erhardt most of the time. We also got on quite well. The whole thing went pretty quickly, as I immediately made the next appointment after each lesson. Apparently, I wasn't really uninitiated either. In any case, Paul had enough confidence in me to let me make my first solo flight on a rather windy day with lots of crosswinds. On May 5th, 2007, after 42 landings and a total flight time of 6 hours and 49 minutes, my flight logbook contains the entry "Holla die Waldfee," which is an expression for "oh my god, what happened here?" I would like to tell this story. Every student pilot making their first solo flight knows that very moment when the wheels leave the ground for the first time and you're alone in the machine. So, there I am now. There's no going back now, and somehow I have to get down again. That's what goes through your mind. The first solo flight only counts as a solo flight if you make 3 takeoffs and landings in a row. The first lap actually went quite smoothly. I did everything as Paul had taught me. Flaps, speed, lateral departure, carburetor preheating off, altitude check, counter approach, report, downwind, report, airspeed indicator, flaps, trim, final, report. Oops, pretty gutsy. Carburetor heat. I struggled pretty well. Hung the wing into the wind, slipped in nicely, bounced around a bit on touchdown, but everything was fine so far. Paul was down at the radio and said something, but unfortunately I didn't have time to listen. But I wasn't feeling well. I was sweating. I didn't have a routine yet. I just thought, well, that went well again. So I took a deep breath, set the flaps to start, neutral trim, carburetor preheating, full throttle, and off I went on the next lap. Same again. Flaps, speed, lateral departure, altitude check, carburetor preheating off, counter approach, report, downwind, report, airspeed indicator, flaps, trim, final, carburetor preheating, report. Oops, no gusts at all. The plane glided absolutely smoothly towards the touchdown point. Like on a string. Until just before touchdown. That's when a gust caught me. I've never experienced anything like it. I thought I was being kicked by a horse. I don't remember what I did. It was all instinctive on the rudders. Only when the machine touched the ground did the nose wheel touch down first. Anyone who knows the Cessnas knows that the nose wheels are disengaged in flight and engaged under load, so that the rudder pedal movement on the ground allows steering with the nose wheel. So when the nose wheel touched down, another gust came just at that very moment, and I stepped on the rudder. The nose wheel folded to the left, and the plane turned on its nose so that the right wing almost touched the ground. The plane jumped off and bounced onto the taxiway, next to the runway, where a motor glider was taxiing down. There was no time to brake, so I gave full throttle. My plane rolled towards the motor glider at full throttle and picked up speed. It seemed to be braking, the glider, but I didn't know that. The airspeed indicator only very slowly entered the green zone, and shortly before that I pulled back and jumped over the motor glider. Far too slowly, of course. With difficulty the plane flew more spongy than anything, but gained speed slowly. Anyone who knows the airfield of Aalen-Ehingen knows that the asphalt runway is 1,000 meters long, and so I managed to steer the plane towards the runway again. I didn't want to touch down, and I just thought to myself, but I wasn't high, maybe about 40 meters, no idea. In my youthful recklessness, my hand made a casual movement and the flaps were gone. Completely. Retracted in one movement. Now I know what they are for. The thing sagged like a stone, and I immediately put it on its nose so that it could pick up speed again. It must have all happened on the edge of what was possible, and looked terrible from the outside. At least, if it looked like it did on the outside, at least if it looked on the outside the way it felt inside. She picked up speed again, touched the track slightly, and then got off well. Into the third round. At some point in the middle of it I thought, so, this is what it looks like when it comes to an end. But it went on. Out in the corner of my eye, I saw how Paul kept picking up the radio and back again and picked it up again and tried to say something, but he didn't. Later he told me that it wouldn't have done any good to say anything, and that at best it would have confused me. I also seemed to have instinctively had the strange situation well under control. Alexandra and Yannick were there and watched everything, and Alexandra even filmed it, but you can't blame anyone for that now. Like in a bad movie, she had forgotten to take the cap off the lens. Out of excitement. Pity, no footage of that available. There were one or two other experiences during my training, but nothing worth mentioning. In the meantime, all the paperwork and maintenance of my Olga had been completed, and Paul gave me a briefing on her on July 14th, 2007. On September 12th, 2007, I flew my final exam at Heubach. That was a Wednesday. On Friday, there was a vintage airplane meeting at the Stillberghof glider airfield, to which I was invited. Now all the levers were set in motion. Normally it takes weeks after obtaining the license before it is issued and delivered, and in the meantime, of course, you are not allowed to fly. Paul called the regional council and pressed all the buttons he knew. He actually managed to get an envelope with the papers by express courier on the 13th, that is Thursday, and on 14th, Friday, I flew to this classic vintage airplane meeting on my own for the very first time, where I flew Olga several times, on display. But the best part was the evenings there at the Stillberghof. After all the spectators have left, and the sun was low in the sky, free hunting. All the small single-engine planes were in the sky, playing cat and mouse. There is even a small press article about this in the magazine Flugzeug Extra, which I would like to read to you at the end now. I'd like to mention two new members to you. The first is Giorgio Kotsodontis, who co-piloted the world flight with Irene Dornier in the Dornier Do 24. He was so convinced of our capabilities that he spontaneously decided to become a member and will expand our circle of active pilots in the future. Another new member is Achim Engels, known to insiders as the Fokker Pope. Sorry. His Fokker workshop is really worth a visit. Also of interest is the freshly restored Aermacchi MB308, with which he took part in the classic aviation meeting at Donauwörth-Stillberghof the day after receiving his pilot's license.